welcome to Live with Search Engine Land, our live session focusing on certain topics of SEO. We talk about various different things, content marketing, new Google updates. This time, we are here talking about Shopify SEO, the ins and outs of Shopify SEO. And joining me today, well, first, I'm George Nguyen, an editor for Search Engine Land. A lot of people ask me how I say my last name, and I'm going to say it this time. It's Nguyen, but you don't have to say it that way. You can just say win, like win or lose. But joining me is Chris Long, SEO manager for Go Fish Digital. Chris, why don't you say hi and maybe say something about yourself?
Yeah, so as George said, my name is Chris Long. I am an SEO manager at Go Fish Digital. Part of my current role is I head up the company's architectural SEO side. So that's really kind of taking a look at our technical SEO offerings, where there are gaps in our offerings, and how can we continue to innovate for our clients, and really just taking a look at maybe some of our larger e-commerce accounts and kind of trying to understand, hey, here are the technical SEO implementations we could make on these accounts. Kind of a fun fact about me will be that I do Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu in my spare time.
So we have to find out what belt you're at. I mean, of course, this has I don't really have a sense of gravity there about how high that up is, but I know black is a big deal. And I'm not going to mess with you either way, Chris. So where are you at?
So right before we went into quarantine, I became a blue belt. So just finally got rid of the white belt stripes and actually moved to a full blue. So yeah, right before quarantine, I got my belt promotion, which was really exciting.
Awesome. Okay, and now Ron Diorio, our second panelist, general manager for the Economist Store. You may recognize the publication. And Learningly, Ron, why don't you say hi?
Hi, I've been at The Economist for approaching 20 years, have multiple different roles. Most recently, over the last 8 years, I've headed up innovation and business development. And across that, we've done lots of different things like podcasting with Economist Radio and VR, AR, and e-commerce. So I came to Shopify about 5 or 6 years ago and really took to it as a fully hands-on manager of the platform, trying to grow the business and build out opportunities both internally and externally for us. So that's been a good experience and worthwhile experience. And I love being able to join these conversations and give the insight about Shopify that we've had. Something about me, I am a visual artist, a late in life visual artist. So there's a gallery in Chelsea that represents my photography and video. Some of my work has been fortunate enough to be purchased and in museum collections. So I get a little bit of immortality from that, but I get a lot more pleasure from making the work and showing it. So that's a little bit about me.
Awesome. Thank you very much. I see that some people are kind of chiming in with why they're interested in this particular session. I encourage you all to leave your comments and your questions in the chat box if you're a live attendee. And you can always reach out and contact me directly if you want to follow up later after the fact, if you're watching this much later, so on and so forth. But so here we have Chris Long from the agency perspective, working with a number of clients to kind of get their sites up and running, fully optimized, tackling some of these issues at scale. And then we have Ron, who manages a store. So I'm already seeing that we have both sides of this just within the people commenting in the chat box. So that's excellent. But let's just zoom out really quickly for people who might be kind of figuring out what exactly is Shopify, or maybe it's very common for a lot of businesses to be trying to figure out ways to expand their online offerings. And so Shopify is a really good place to kind of do that for first-time business owners. My perspective is I actually set up a Shopify store in the course of writing Search Engine Land's Shopify SEO guide. And a lot of shenanigans ensued. I figured out things, I broke things, but I kind of got this vibe at the beginning that this is kind of like WordPress, but for e-commerce. And those are my words, they're not anyone else's. That may not totally be accurate, but what's your take on that, Chris? Do you think that's an accurate analogy?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a great analogy, right? To me, Shopify is an e-commerce platform, right? It's seen a ton of growth as everyone has seen, especially just in the past few years here, and really the past 6 months. For me, one of the reasons I think it's gained so much popularity is that maybe it's the outlet and a cost-effective outlet for a small shop to actually get an e-commerce presence, right? You don't need to have the technical depth that maybe a Magento would need, and it might not come at the pricing cost of kind of some other e-commerce options. So for me, I think kind of that like WordPress analogy is a really, really good one for Shopify, and one of the reasons that's kind of helped it gain in popularity in the last few years.
Right on, and like even going along with that analogy, there's what was it? WordPress has plugins and Shopify has apps. You listed some benefits there. Are those in line with Ron, why the Economist Store decided to hop on board with Shopify as a CMS?
Yeah, just take it back a bit. The Economist had been involved in commerce for a long time. There was an actual physical store in London on Regent Street for a very long time. When that closed, we had some interim online experiences trying to do e-commerce. When I was given responsibility for this project, we looked at whether we should build a custom software solution or whether we should look for something more scalable and simple. We chose Shopify, and we found that it is simple, it's scalable, it's secure, it allows us to expand vertically and horizontally across what we can do. E-commerce is complex for lots of different reasons. You're dealing with lots of customers, you're dealing with charges. So knowing that the platform was stable, I guess that's the other word to say about it, allowed us to take this on with a minimum of internal effort. So while we are an older and a bigger organization, we have a very small footprint of people who are managing this with like a consultant. That was one of the reasons we chose it. It was manageable.
Right, and we've discussed this previously, Ron, but you told us that your team's quite small. Can you put a number to that just so that our attendees and our viewers kind of have a feel for your background?
Yeah, so besides myself, we have technically 1.2 people. So one full-time person and 20% of another full-time person here who helps us. And we had to split that out between based on geography. So we have some support in London and also here in the US to be able to run a global business. So again, it's like 2.2 people in total.
Yeah, that's shoestring is how I would describe that, but you guys are making it work. And you've described, both of you have described easy to get started, the ability to scale, reliability. When I hear that as a cynic, just being personally a cynic, I'm like, well, those are great things, but what's the catch here? There has to be drawbacks. Chris, do you find that there are any drawbacks? I know that there are SEO drawbacks for sure, but I want to know what comes to your head just initially.
Yeah, I mean, right off the bat, as we'll kind of get into a little bit more, right? There are definitely drawbacks from a technical SEO standpoint. Generally, what we found, at least working with Shopify sites, is there tends to be a little bit less flexibility, and maybe that kind of comes at a trade-off for how easy it is to use directly out of the box. One of its biggest benefits there, but it also is kind of harder to maybe really tailor to your specific needs. At least from a technical SEO standpoint, maybe a little bit further down the line. That's something that we've kind of run into. And another big one will be just in terms of like the app, essentially the app store, right? It's definitely coming along really well. But if you're talking about Shopify's app environment compared to a WordPress that's been much more built out, Shopify still has a little bit more to go, right? Definitely a nice part of the platform, but something that a lot of webmasters might lose. You're not going to have all the options for plugins, right? There's not going to be 30 different comment plugins or anything like that. It's going to be a little bit more of a kind of a new app environment. So you're going to kind of have some of those things that go along with kind of the Shopify platform.
Right, and even just the apps. the most famous WordPress apps have tens of thousands of reviews, as where Shopify apps, like the higher end, is like 500 reviews, I feel like.
Mhm.
So that's kind of the marketplace we're speaking of. Ron, in your capacity, I know that you're not like in there in the back end working with the liquid templates and trying to figure things out, but have you run across any SEO challenges that are just kind of bugging at you, or in the past, or even now with your store?
Right. So we have two SEO questions we always have to answer. One is what kind of search engine optimization we can get support from other parts of the business, like linking, which helps raise page value up, and which products are exclusive to us, which we should own, and then try to determine whether there's enough traffic to it. So there's a whole series of things there. In terms of the templates, we're running actually two stores. We've got a store that runs in dollars facing the US and Canada, and one that runs in pounds facing the rest of the world. So we have had trouble in SEO trying to not have duplicate pages with different subdomains. And I think that that's been like something we haven't really figured out yet, but it hasn't been so detrimental that we can't run it. So from an SEO perspective, I think that's the biggest one that keeps recurring for us, that we've got these two, we have a store and a duplicate store facing different ways. Contractually, we're required to do that for some other partners we have. And so we are, always looking at that and trying to figure out how we can minimize the duplication.
Right. Are these common themes or issues that you've come across? This is the first time I'm hearing of these kind of particular issues. But Chris, are these common issues that you come across with your clients? And if so, or if not, what are some common issues that you run up against?
Right. So I'd say one of the common issues we see with clients, one of the biggest things a lot of Shopify store owners ask about is site speed, right off the bat. But this is kind of one of those things that is perceived as an issue, but oftentimes I don't perceive it as one necessarily. Basically, in almost all of the Shopify accounts we've had, our clients are constantly asking us, hey, we think Shopify doesn't perform great. We want to help improve performance. Actually, in my mind, Shopify performs quite well for an e-commerce platform. We've actually done our own internal tests where we basically took all these different Shopify stores and then ran them through Screaming Frog. We essentially got all the data back in terms of performance from them. And actually, Shopify stores generally perform like they get around 20 or less in terms of their score on Google Page Speed Insights. I think the average store performs around 3.5 seconds. But in reality, that's like not terrible for an e-commerce site. When you kind of have an e-commerce site and you want to have, all of your different things, right? Your pop-up ads and your chat bots and all of these different like kind of functions that you want your e-com store to do, that's going to come at a trade-off of page speed, right? So that's something we've had a lot of clients ask about, but really maybe one of the benefits of Shopify. I actually think it like tends to perform a little better than other e-com stores we compare it to.
Wow, really kind of surprising, because the general wisdom seems to be that the more stuff you add, the higher the likelihood that stuff is going to slow down.
Mhm.
Ron, are you running a lot of extra code, a lot of plugins or apps on your Shopify store?
On the front end, we have a few, but I think to Chris's point, over time, we've tried and removed stuff and try to optimize for the customer experience. So while we are, when you visit the store, trying to figure out, are you in the right store? Do you need to go to the US store, to the rest of the world store? Will you sign up for an email newsletter and then a chat bot to help you with things, are probably the primary front end things that an end user will see. Underneath that, we have some other plugins. I don't think we've done as detailed a review recently as Chris, but our partner who work with us has been good over the years to make sure that we're optimizing and reducing any latency where it doesn't impact customer service. I mean, because that's people expect world-class customer service and experience, and we're trying to provide both. And as Chris said, sometimes there's a bit of a trade-off depending on where people are as well in the world.
Right,
Yeah.
and I definitely want to hear about your experience. I'm sorry, Chris, did I interrupt you?
Oh, no, sorry. All I was going to say was that with an e-commerce store generally, like Shopify, I think it's like a perceived problem where customers might think, oh, Shopify doesn't perform as well. But really with any e-commerce store, like adding all of those things, as kind of Ron mentioned, is going to kind of add to the overall page load. From what we've seen compared to other e-com platforms, Shopify actually does perform actually pretty well.
One of the great things about Shopify is that once you get to the payment screens, you're really limited on what you can do. So I think that people might be trying too many things on those pages if they were given the ability to do it, and that constraint is actually a positive there. It gets people through the process quicker. The other thing that Shopify has, and that was helpful to us when we were starting, was this idea of Shopify experts, that you can go in and find people to help you. And so, we were lucky at the beginning, which is 5 years ago, to find someone to work with us, and they're still working with us out of London. And a company called We Make Websites, but they have been, like, we sort of grew with them, and I think we challenged them to do things for us that other clients had not asked for. And so whether that is page load speed or SEO or design, we have some challenges that we need to address as a brand that's been around for 176 years.
When you say Shopify experts, is that like is that a certification program? This is the first time I'm running across that terminology.
I'm not sure how Shopify certifies people to be an expert, or again, I haven't looked for Shopify experts since we first started. We get a lot of Shopify experts contacting us now once they realize we're on Shopify, but at the time we looked for the highest rated Shopify expert in the UK, and found them to be willing to do a couple of things for us, which was do basically a evaluation of what they thought our needs were for Shopify, which actually matched up point to point with our consultant who came in and said how to run an e-commerce business. And we said, all right, these people sort of understand the business that we want to be in. They understood the brand because they were British. So there were a couple of other things we were looking for there, but there's a whole series of levels of Shopify expertise, whether it's marketing or I guess SEO now, or page design, that you would look for. We were just looking for the best hand holding we could get as we went through this initiation process. And we were lucky, I think.
Awesome. I do want to know more about what it's like to work with an agency, especially because we have someone from an agency here with us, Chris. But I wanted to close off this conversation about speed because while speed is a ranking factor, Google has said that it's not so like clear and cut. It's just kind of like, oh, do you perform well enough? Well, then good, that's good enough. It's not like, oh, you have to meet this threshold necessarily. But within the nuance of running an e-commerce store, speed is especially important, because if you don't respond in a timely manner, if your stuff doesn't load, people are just not going to buy. You're not going to make those conversions, make those sales. So, Chris, is there anything that Shopify store owners should really be careful about in terms of making sure that they preserve that speed? Is there something that they could unintentionally do that kind of destroys that, or really gets in the way of the user experience?
Yeah, great question. And to your point, right, speed, I think it's something a lot of SEOs maybe get a little tunnel vision on. Sometimes people say speed isn't a huge ranking factor, so maybe gets put to the wayside a little bit. But speed impacts all of your digital channels, right? Not just your SEO, but any display ads you're writing, Google ads, whatever you're doing. Speed is a component of all of that. From the Shopify stores we've seen run exceptionally fast. Like the top 20%, those are generally like extremely lightweight. They generally use a very, very lightweight theme. Have very, very limited. They're very limited in terms of the images they use, the apps that are run. Essentially, they're limiting the total amount of requests they're making. So that's generally what we found in kind of those top 20% of Shopify sites. I'd say two big things that we see Shopify store owners taking advantage of would be compressing images, right? An e-commerce store is always extremely image heavy, right? And if you're just loading images at whatever size you feel like, that's going to obviously slow down page speed. Number two is not using the lazy loading functionality. Very key to Shopify stores. It's actually exceptionally easy for developers to implement in most cases. There's a library called the Lazy Sizes library that works very well with Shopify. We've used that on a lot of our clients. And then three, I guess, I don't know if I said three, but will be just limiting apps, right? As much as you can, take a look at the apps that you're running, and especially ones that might be congesting page loads, and have a realistic conversation with yourself and your developer, right? Say, hey, what app does this app drive value to us? Does it improve user experience? Does it help with conversions? Is it actually a value add, or is it just kind of a really nice to have? And if it's kind of that latter, maybe consider removing it. Those apps do add to page bloat, they add to additional requests. And if you're not gaining value out of that functionality, there's no reason you should be having it on your store. But the real kind of questions come when you do have things that might be slowing down the store, but it's responsible for 30% of revenue or something like that. Those apps you should probably keep.
Right. And SEO tunnel vision. I feel like every SEO's got their main thing that they really like to focus on or evangelize, right? Okay, so one of the main talked about things that it's almost impossible not to run across when you're trying to go above and beyond what you kind of get within the box of Shopify when you initially start up your store is trying to figure out this duplicate pages issue here. And I've talked to several people. Some people are like, oh, it's not really that big of a deal. But if you want to get to that next level of optimization, it kind of is. Can you describe the duplicate pages issue for us, Chris?
Yep, no problem. There's actually several ways Shopify will create duplicate content. The big one that most people refer to are on the category pages themselves. Category pages will essentially link to duplicate product pages. If you haven't made any adjustments to your store, often when you hover over a product link on a category page, you'll see that link actually contains the terms category and product in it. But then if you look at the actual URL ranking in Google, that URL will only contain the product URL in it. These URLs technically do canonical back to their correct landing pages, but Shopify does create duplicate internal links. And the reason this is just a bit riskier from an SEO perspective, right, is you're setting up your entire website's architecture around duplicate pages. Basically, every single category page that you have on the site will say, hey, is going to push internal links to these product pages, but all of the product pages that are getting internal links actually technically aren't eligible to rank in the search engines. So that's generally the big one people refer to. But there are definitely smaller ones where Shopify creates duplicate content as well. Within the pagination, it'll create duplicate content. If you ever link back to, if you click the first page link in a series, that actually links back to a URL that has page 1 at the end. It's always a duplicate of the initial source category page. So that's another way the Shopify platform can create duplicate content.
Now, the duplicate content issue, have you looked into it, Ron? Is this an issue for the Economist Store or Learningly?
Well, we've looked into it and tried to minimize it where we can. As I think both you and Chris had hinted at, you need to prioritize the things that you want to address most, relative to their importance or the time of the season or what you can get to. And so again, for us on the store, it's having these basically duplicate stores with different subdomains to deal with different regions, and we're always looking at that to make sure that Google understands it. Sometimes it's actually comes up as a benefit because we have more pages there, at least some ways it looks like that for things that we own. But again, for Learningly, I think Chris's thing on the category page is when you go to the pagination, it does confuse me as to why so many pages are there in duplicate. And it's one of the things on our list for the roadmap is to try to sort that out a little bit more.
Right. And so one of the things that we always talk about when we talk about duplicate content in general is that it splits up signals. You know, you never know who's going to be referring to you, linking to you, but this is within an e-commerce context. So you're not really often expecting a ton of backlinks coming from outside sources because, you know, who really backlinks to just a product page, right? But for internal linking, this also does kind of muddle things up, doesn't it?
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, definitely kind of muddles things up because, like, basically because you're sending all of your internal link signals to pages that actually aren't ranking in the search engines. So I think it's a very confusing way to lay out your website for the search engines.
So I've seen some solutions, and the one that I implemented on the experimental store that I went on actually involved going within the liquid template. And for somebody as new to e-commerce as me, who is not an e-commerce marketer, I am a journalist, that just seems like an incredibly risky proposition because you're looking at all this code and you're just trusting the advice of, you know, ideally my Shopify guide or your Shopify guide, Chris. Um, and I think I was able to make it work. Is that the only solution to this duplicate content issue? Are there other workarounds that you advise people use if this is a concern for them?
Yes, that's the only one we found that's consistently worked. And I would say, yeah, if you're seeing that, definitely maybe worth a shot in terms of communicating, especially if you have a developer on hand to do it. It's generally fairly straightforward from a development perspective. So if you do have a developer, generally it's pretty easy for them to do that. We actually haven't had too many issues, but I haven't been able to come up with any other workarounds other than making adjustments to that liquid file.
All right. So just for any of you who haven't done that are looking into it, for me, I was on the phone with Detlef Johnson, who is our technical SEO advisor at Search Engine Land, and it was as if I felt as if I was trying to land a plane and the pilot was knocked out. That was not as dramatic as it actually was. He walked me through it. It was very, very simple. It took like, I think 5 minutes. Would you say that that's how long it takes, Chris? So it's a very short procedure, right?
Yeah, from the conversations I've had with developers who we've worked with, generally it's not too big of a daunting task for them. It's nothing that's generally required a ton of feedback back and forth. We can tell, you know, hey, they're having, you know, maybe a few troubleshooting steps with this implementation. No, it's generally been very straightforward with us.
Right. So, you know, if that emboldens anyone to give it a try, yes, but please don't blame me if you mess up. Okay. Cool. So there are also architectural limitations, especially in terms of how you want to structure your URLs, aren't there, Chris?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, basically with Shopify, your URLs are fairly static, right? In terms of you have to use, you know, the pages like slug or whatever. It's oftentimes you don't see Shopify stores where it's like, hey, we have luxury watches, and the URL path goes, you know, shopify.com/watches/brand/luxury watches, right? You don't really have that customization, which is generally a best practice for an e-com store. In Shopify's defense, I will say, I have seen some e-commerce stores with some ugly URLs before. So it's like nothing new to the e-commerce space, especially, you know, on a product page on a large site, right? You'll see URLs that are using like all kinds of numbers and letters in there. So to Shopify's defense, they're definitely a lot cleaner than that. But a lot of times, yes, you can't get it that perfect, nice nested URL structure that, you know, we as e-commerce SEOs so love very much. That's oftentimes not something you can do directly on the Shopify solution.
Ron, I would love to hear from you about this. Does the structure, is it something that you look at and you kind of like cringe over? Is it a nagging thing, or is it something you're like, oh, this is fairly optimized, it's good enough, it's much better, you know, it could be much worse?
Well, we're trying to be as clear as possible. I mean, The Economist, if it's about something, it's about clear language. So we try to describe what the product is. And we have, I think, for the most part, used the default URL creation structure within Shopify, and just making sure that we have accurately describe the product that we're putting in there, but also to try to make sure as we update products year to year to go from a 2019 diary to a 2020 diary, that we can keep the page but change the name without losing the SEO rank. So that has been a place where I think we try to play around the edges of SEO alchemy, and keep our rankings as high as possible.
Awesome. So I'm going to just pause the flow of our conversation a little bit, and I want to bring in some of these questions that are popping up in the chat. And we're at the halfway point, so I definitely encourage you to leave questions. We'll try to get to them as we can. I'm not going to mention any of your names just in case you don't want me to, but somebody has asked, first, do you find more people putting more emphasis on UX when it comes to the best SEO practices? And second, do you find more people building custom sites and integrating Shopify with it as a way of getting better control over the site experience as well as SEO? And so I think this one's more for Chris, unless Ron, you also know, but I'd like to hear from Chris.
Sure. So I mean, with any e-commerce store, right, there's the line that you have to walk between performance, SEO, and UX, right? And I think that's one of the challenging things with any e-commerce store, right? Kind of like we talked about before, you want to build an e-commerce store that converts and has all this great functionality, but a lot of times that comes off at a performance trade-off. We work with clients to try to try to walk that line as much as possible, right? How can you still have all your nice features but still get the most out of your performance? I think that's kind of the goal of a lot of e-commerce stores, in my opinion, is just do the best you can while trying to maintain the features that work for you. Try to keep your features that convert, because that's kind of your primary goal, and then try to improve your performance based around that. In terms of clients, making custom sites and then using Shopify as an extension, I haven't seen as much of that. Primarily, what we will see, if Shopify doesn't live on the main site, right? Oftentimes, stores will use it as an extension, kind of like what we're talking about today, where it's hey, this isn't our main site, but our e-commerce side exists on store.domain.com. So we're seeing a lot of that, right? And that makes sense when maybe the primary bulk of your business isn't an e-commerce store, right?
And I would just jump in and say that the experiences that we've had is over time, as our own main site UX design has changed, there's been challenges around how fast we can adapt Shopify, and whether decisions that are being made for reading are the same kind of UX decisions you want to make for shopping. I mean, obviously there are some fundamental things that would be similar, and so there's ongoing conversations and compromises and understanding about that.
Right. It always comes back down to what is it you're building for and who your audience is. I know it's just the most generic advice, but it's always accurate. And someone else asked a very simple question. Would you benchmark a page speed for Shopify, or does it vary across themes? This one's for you in particular, Chris.
Varies across themes. We've written a post that actually breaks down the top Shopify themes by speed. If you're interested in looking at that, it's on the Go Fish Digital site. So you can actually test Shopify themes right off the bat. If you want, I actually have the numbers up in front of me. An average Shopify site will be about 3.8 seconds first contentful paint. Other aspects would be about 171 requests is the average Shopify site. So just kind of giving you maybe some benchmarks in terms of how fast your store is the medium. That's also on the post we wrote. But yeah, those are kind of the general benchmarks. And I guess total page size of around 4 megabytes. And that can kind of help you gauge whether or not your Shopify site performs around the mean or performs above or below. But these are obviously much larger than you would see for a standard marketing site, right? Because e-commerce sites are just bigger by their nature.
You just have these numbers pulled up and like you had these ready for this, right? They just don't happen to be there on your desktop, Chris.
So I came prepared. I came prepared.
Ooh, I appreciate it, and so do our guests. All right, now this question is, I'm not quite sure how you answer it, but I want to see you guys attempt to. Have you found that Shopify sites are generally faster than WordPress sites implementing similar functionality using WooCommerce? And Ron, I know that you were on a different CMS before. I'd also like to hear your evaluation of how site speed has changed. But I feel like you just kind of have to take a stab at this one, Chris.
Yeah, I don't know how. It's all going to depend on what technology you're using, right? If we take the question to, are Shopify sites going to be generally faster than WordPress sites? No, like WordPress sites are generally much faster. Generally, the more like marketing brochure style sites, right? They don't need as much implementation or as much functionality. That's not to say I've seen some very, very slow WordPress sites as well. But just all things being equal, Shopify is going to be faster. In terms of I guess the only other thing to that will be WordPress is probably going to give you more options, right? If you're taking like, if you have a bunch of apps on WordPress and a bunch of apps on Shopify, well, WordPress is like app market's going to be much larger. So you're probably going to have like more options and say, hey, we need to find the most lightweight chat option possible. You probably might be able to dig a little bit deeper on the WordPress app environment than Shopify. So WordPress, I think, will give you a little more options to make things as lightweight as possible. I think that's like the best way I could answer it.
All right, I'll take you off of the hot seat here, Chris. Ron, can you describe your experiences moving off of your previous CMS and how that has affected your Shopify site now, or the Economist Store on Shopify?
Right. So I think what we found when we were evaluating what we should move to from our previous site was that we were on a site that wasn't built for purpose. It was built for another e-commerce style endeavor. And this was, back in 2013, 2012, when we moved over to that other platform. I'm not going to say the platform because it's not fair to it. It wasn't meant to be like a merchandising site. But we had an easy comparison in terms of speed because Shopify beat it right out of the box. And we had to really throw a lot of stuff onto it for it to be slower, or at least get up to that speed. But the other thing that Shopify had that we didn't necessarily have access to previously was real-time analytics, and so that we could fix things that were not working rather quickly. I think one of the challenges around SEO, where you have lots of metrics that you're measuring, is that like one or two changes and you start to have depressed response rate and everyone's blaming the SEO, or Google changed how they're indexing and why did you change the SEO? And there's a bit of trial and error, but there's also this meta ecosystem that you're sitting in, namely Google and who's linking to you, that will have some effect on it. So, specifically for this question, we had a very simple comp. We could eyeball it on two screens to see what was responding faster. We didn't have to go much further at the beginning, but Shopify, you do need to probably every 6 months, I would say, just go through and make sure that you haven't done anything or somewhere else is affecting it with another app that hasn't slowed it down. So I would say, something in the calendar that says check site speed is worth it every 3 to 6 months. I see Chris shaking his head. It's not fixed once, and like Ron Popeil, set it and forget it.
I remember those infomercials for the oven.
Yeah.
Anyway, thanks for that flashback. So you have this perspective of moving from one CMS to another. And the thing is, nothing exists in a vacuum. Even if your sole responsibility is the e-commerce store, you also have to work within the confines of your company or whatever greater team marketing. And you often have to provide them resources, or you're leaning on them for other things. Are there any let's see here. Sorry. Okay, cool. I think I just heard some background noise. Has Shopify facilitated or hindered cross-departmental collaboration for your organization, Ron?
It greatly enhanced it. I mean, one of the things that we were able to do as we started to learn what Shopify could do was to see and identify other problems in the organizations to which we could help solve small problems, big problems, individual problems. And so once Shopify was locked in, we had people coming to us to see if they could offload some of their fulfillment. We've had people come to us to try to understand how vouchering can be used for gifting or incentivizing people in other areas of the business. We've had, and that's been great for us because that's less expensive marketing, right? Of having someone internally send their own people to our site to have a transaction creates awareness, gets them in the system, creates a transaction pattern for them to follow through. So I always have an ear to what my colleagues are trying to solve, and where appropriate and fit the purpose, we can offer a Shopify solution. We've gone out there with it, and it has been very satisfying over the course of the last few years to find internally people who now turn to us and either with a problem and ask us how can you solve it, or us going to them and say let's imagine a solution to something for you and test it, right? Because that's the other thing Shopify is great for is testing.
Right. And just within the greater realm of SEO, SEO often just kind of feels like something that the C-suite is aware of and management knows is important, and you get this sort of buy-in, but you're not often backed or supported. You're often asking for other team members to do things for you. Remember, your counterparts in development, you have to rely on them a lot of the times, and you have to be on the same page with a lot of pretty much anybody who touches the website, because they will influence the SEO. And making sure that you're able to rely on each other and reciprocate when they need something from you makes SEO a real part of the company, making SEO part of the fabric of the company, which will enhance just your organization's visibility cross board, and means that you get to spend more time increasing your visibility and hopefully bringing in traffic, driving those conversions, as opposed to undoing the work, something that maybe one of your team members, one of your colleagues from another team accidentally did that has decreased your visibility, unfortunately. Awesome. Thank you so much for sharing that, Ron. Let's see here. If you have any other questions, please do leave them. We have some time here, so hopefully we'll get to them. I wanted to ask about any other challenges. We talked about the two most talked about things, I feel like, the duplicate content issue and the rigid architecture. But what are the other factors that might really stop your Shopify site from performing as well as it could? Chris, does anything come to mind?
Yeah, a couple things come to mind. One, there's certain kind of technical limitations, right? You won't have control over your robots.txt file. So right, you can't control the crawl of your site, which is a big deal for e-commerce. I think another one that I see commonly missed by Shopify store owners is actually a focus on branded terms. I think this is something that gets overlooked a lot in SEO, but it's something where I've seen e-com stores and Shopify stores a lot of times get outranked or not take branded queries seriously enough. Where people are searching for your products or searching for your categories. And let's say you have a product that you have on your D2C brand and you have a product that you have on a Shopify store, but you also sell that in big box retailers. Well, maybe those big box retailers actually outrank your Shopify site. And if you're losing on branded terms, that's high intent, high revenue keywords that you're not getting organic traffic for. That's a really big missed opportunity I see on Shopify sites, where Shopify store owners could be paying a little bit more attention to how you're ranking for brand. As well, another one is ensuring proper keyword mappings. And what I mean by that is ensuring that, hey, we want to rank for, let's use luxury watches again. We want to rank for the term luxury watches, but we don't even have a luxury watches category page set up on our site. Really ensuring that for every keyword that you want to rank for, what the SERP is showing. So is it showing product pages? Is it showing category pages? Is it showing maybe blog posts? And then setting up content that actually meets that intent. and really knowing what your core keywords are. Oftentimes you can use like AdWords data to say, hey, these are the biggest revenue driving keywords for our Shopify store. And then seeing, hey, where are there gaps in terms of our content and where are our keywords not mapped properly for kind of our high revenue generating terms. And those are two big areas I would advise a lot of Shopify store owners to maybe just take a little bit more of a look at.
That
You know,
sounds
and
like
just
good advice.
in our
Sorry, go
case,
ahead,
we're
Ron.
actually sharing branded terms with the mothership, right? And
Mhm.
so we want them to succeed because eventually the funnel will drive people to us. But we also have some branded words that we would like, and so it's a negotiation as to try to figure out like what is the how do you defer in the different places to make sure that you're maximizing both the customer experience, like finding what they want to find in the right order, and also the revenue opportunity.
That just sounds like good advice across the board, almost regardless of what CMS you happen to be on. I mean, if you're a manufacturer and there are other retailers selling the same thing you are. I wanted to circle back to this question that I had that you kind of raised earlier, where you glanced upon is, Ron, you work with a consultancy or an agency to handle part of your Shopify store. I wanted to figure out the capacity with which your team works and how they work with an agency, what that relationship is like.
Right. So, so the agency relationship has evolved. So at the beginning, we needed some hands-on support because we were a small team just to get things done. To make sure things were structured, make sure the apps were working, help us answer questions internally so that we could check off the boxes for security, privacy, PCI compliance, and things like that. We needed that kind of official. They're the expert. Since then, because we're running two sites, Learningly and the Economist Store, we needed to have different solutions in both of those places. So on the one hand, we were trying to build a two-sided marketplace for expert e-courses, and the Shopify experts were able to work with us and our partners to solve some of the process problems and transactional challenges we were having getting it to work. In fact, creating a first-party Shopify app for us to work with Learningly was the biggest solution that our learning management provider and our expert We Make Websites brought to us. So that was a really exciting thing. So currently we'll work with design, we'll work with broken pages where a customer cannot complete something that we need them to complete. For instance, if there's customization on our leather diaries, they can't put their initials in or their names in, or it's incorrectly displaying it to the customization house. They'll help us try to sort through those problems. The other side of it is that we have partners who have now become not Shopify experts in the way that Shopify describes them, but they've gone out and they've built Shopify apps for us, which then they now use for their own businesses. And two fulfillment houses for us, one in the US and one in London, actually built their first Shopify app for us, seeing that Shopify was a growing potential for business for them, right? Being able to pick, pack, and ship. So while Shopify experts is a term in the Shopify ecosphere, I think your own partners, your third-party distributors are also need to become Shopify experts to make everything work smoothly. I don't know if Chris, in your agency, you see those kinds of things as well.
Yeah, I'm sorry, go ahead, George.
No, I was just gonna pick your brain on that.
Yeah, I mean that's one of our goals for all of our clients, right? Is to be kind of the Shopify guidance for our clients, right? We want to ensure that we're staying up to date with like best practices in terms of like what are any new updates in terms of SEO that you should be paying attention to your Shopify store. So we're always trying to definitely be kind of our clients experts in terms of how do I do this particular Shopify implementation.
Okay. In terms of like any errors that you come across that Shopify, maybe newer Shopify store owners come across, and maybe even in your own experience, Ron, has there been anything that prospective Shopify store owners should be aware of in terms of preserving their SEO. We already talked about like not bogging it down in terms of having way too many apps that you don't need. But the great thing about this platform is supposed to be that that you're not supposed to be able to mess it up very easily. It's very rigid. And do you find that it's true to that, or are there ways that you can accidentally make something go wrong?
I'm sure there are, and I'm sure we have, and I'm sure there are some that I haven't found yet. So let me say that the great thing about Shopify is that it should surface the problems pretty quickly, so you can resolve them. I think one of the things that would have been nice, but wasn't really at the top of our list when we went into this, was to think about what the SEO architecture would have looked like, almost like an SEO sitemap, before we published, that would have like read, or suggested some problems. So maybe like with Chris's specialty, bringing them in earlier to think about how you're structuring things. But in e-commerce, nothing stays the same. There may be 4 or 5 products that are core, that repeat, and those can be safe and secure. But everything else is it working? Let's add something else, and then you find yourself in a situation where you have some Shopify product debt rather than technical debt. And that could also be on the blog pages too, where you've sort of did a blog, but not really. I think you have to be committed to focus on certain places. But I think that we call it Shopify product page debt, where we've got sort of abandoned, orphaned, or products that are too similar that are out there.
Anything to add there, Chris?
Yeah, I think it's like a great consideration of any e-com store, Shopify included, right? Is how do we handle our product pages, right? What happens when this product page expires? What happens when we get a new replacement product? Do we 301 redirect that back to a category page? Do we let it 404? How do we handle kind of what's our SEO process for our inventory levels? I think it's like a big question that a Shopify store owner should be thinking about, and a way that maybe Shopify store sites might have incorrect SEO implementations. Technically best practice isn't to redirect all your old products back to your category pages. That Google often treats that as soft 404 errors. So you want to be thinking about when we have additional products that are either similar or just expire or out of inventory. How do we handle those situations? That's definitely like a big SEO consideration of Shopify stores and really any e-commerce site.
Awesome. We do have one final question, and then we're going to be moving into some closing remarks, and then we'll finish this off at the hour. Someone has asked, one good thing about Shopify is the availability of a CDN, a content delivery network, but at the same time, it results in reducing the page speed with some unused CSS. Is there a way to get the best of both worlds? I feel like you're really at this point, you're kind of really worrying about the split differences here in loading times. Chris?
Not that I've come across. I think to that point, overall, one of the benefits of Shopify is that it comes with this nice out-of-the-box CDN that most people who some people who don't even know what a CDN don't even have to worry about. It helps performance. Maybe there is a little bit. Maybe there's some unused CSS, some things that cause some bloat on the page. Overall, I would say that's more of a benefit of the platform, especially that makes it just so easy to use out of the box, and kind of has a nice performance setup right in place for people who may not be as technically familiar with, hey, should I put my website on a CDN?
So in my previous experiences with CDNs, I know that some of them will actually resize your images, but earlier we talked about image optimization being an important factor that can shave off some of your loading time. The CDN, when I was doing my research, I couldn't figure out whether Shopify CDN actually resizes your images or it's just a CDN. Chris, do you have any clarity there?
That's a good question. I haven't seen any resizing capabilities of the CDN. I have come across a lot of Shopify stores with really large images, right on their category pages, where the images clearly aren't getting automatically compressed by a CDN. Whether that's a capability or a developer can kind of make that a capability, I'm not exactly sure of.
Okay, that's pretty much what I thought.
Yeah.
All right, we are moving into these closing remarks. Ron, I wanted to ask you if you had anything to tell prospective store owners or maybe existing store owners from your experience, any tips that will make them successful with their Shopify store.
Well, I think you need to think customer first, right? So one of the great things about Shopify, because it's so easy, is that it's easy to forget that you want to have a customer experience and a customer relationship that is worthwhile continuing. And so when you're looking to build your store, to build in those apps or communication tools that are optimized for the best way to service the customer, help the customer complete the transaction, the abandoned cart, and also get them the fulfillment information they want. Because you know, a 0.3-second load time is probably less detrimental. The difference is less detrimental than a 3-week delay in getting them what they purchased. So while Shopify, as Chris said, for many people offers a tremendous opportunity to build e-commerce with little technical skill, I think it's still being the store owner, the merchandiser, the person who cares about their customer, and that should be built into the templates that you're creating for your end user.
I also want to hear if you have any specific SEO advice, but I want to move this over to Chris and then give you some time to think that over, Ron. Chris, do
Okay.
you have any advice?
I love customer first. That's a great one. There's two more that come to mind for Shopify stores. One, check intent of all your keywords, right? One of the biggest errors I see with a lot of Shopify stores is a lot of keywords that they think are e-commerce keywords and should be have category and product pages ranking, actually have a lot of blog content ranking for those keywords. So check the intent of all your keywords. If you want to rank for running shoes and you see that the SERP doesn't have any category pages of running shoes, but has, affiliate sites that say, here are the 15 best running shoes of 2020, you need to go out and create that content. You can try to push a category page as much as you want with the SERP, but it probably is not going to work. So one, check intent, and if that intent is informational, go out and create that informational content. Two, not as SEO specific, but maybe kind of almost taking that more of a customer first approach. CRO. I think CRO is a big missed opportunity for Shopify stores. Constantly test your site, right? Test the CTA color change, test changing the CTA color, test moving reviews further up the page. See, if you run a Google optimized experience, does that change result in a positive impact for users? Obviously, that'll help improve, hopefully, conversions and revenue, and also your SEO is kind of a secondary component as well.
Great advice. Now, as promised, circling back to you, Ron.
Well, I think on the SEO side, again, my experience with SEO has been maybe more trial and error, but I think I would, as I said before, I'd like to think the next time, given a chance to think it more clearly from the beginning, like what do we want to own, which spaces do we want to rank highly in, and build around either those product pages, those category pages, blog posts, to have the core building blocks there. I think the other thing is, and I'm not sure how Google manages this in the future, but I would start to assume that bad reviews will start to impact SEO rankings. So again, it goes back to customer first. You need to be selling products that are worthwhile. You need to have customer interactions that are valuable, and you need to be able to get customers to express that positivity through their whole lifetime value with you.
Perfect. And before we do close off, there is something that I don't think that we can really close this off with without addressing. Is there's this whole new technology that allows you to use JavaScript to just about change everything on your Shopify site. Do you have any experience with this? I forgot what it's called, Chris.
Is it Cloudflare Edge Workers? Is that
Yeah,
it?
yes, that is the one, right? And my experience is just in the research here, but do you have any experience with using this technology to gain more control over your SEO, your site architecture, all those things?
So that's something we're definitely working on in terms of figuring out, hey, how can we utilize maybe, edge worker technology to get more out of the Shopify platform? I do know there is ongoing research out there that talks about how you can use edge workers to get around some of these Shopify limitations. So I think you can use edge workers to actually potentially change URL structures. I'm pretty sure I know Dan Taylor has done some research around, hey, you can actually use edge workers to pull some type of log file from Shopify. So definitely some more advanced Shopify tactics. And go check out his work if you want to see, hey, here's how maybe I could use the Shopify, essentially that Cloudflare technology to get the most out of my Shopify store.
Right. And this is not something that we recommend beginner Shopify store owners or people without development knowledge get into, but I did think it was worth mentioning. Chris and Ron, once again, thank you so much for joining us on this panel, and for all of our live attendees and anyone watching this on demand later. Thank you so much for joining us. This has been Live with Search Engine Land. Next week, we have another session, actually 3. SEO for Developers starts on Wednesday, July 22nd, and runs through the Friday, July 24th. We hope to see you then. That'll be hosted by our own Detlef Johnson for all you technical SEO and just development enthusiasts. Once again, thank you for joining us, Chris. Ron, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, George.